This video is sponsored by readathons because that's the only way this happened. Oh my goodness, y'all. I read so many books in February. I don't even know how I did this. I had less time off and I read more books than I did in December, which is so far my highest recorded reading month. At least it was until February came. I participated in 3 readathons. I'm not even going to get into what challenges I fulfilled. Just know that I did 2 of the rows on the bingo board for vaLITines, and then I also ended up hitting all of the prompts for Blackathon except for the spoken word prompts, which I still need to go back and listen to because I forget these things if I don't write them down, and I didn't. So, y'all said you wanted 1 long video instead of 2 short ones, so I'm going to get into it. Try not to waste your time too much because we have 17 books to talk about. First off, like I said, I read 17 books in February. That came out to 6,281 pages or 224 pages per day. Again, audiobooks are a blessing. Of those, I read a whopping 8 5-star books. Now keep in mind that some of those are 5 stars because they were rereads, so obviously they were going to be 5 stars already. I also read 5 4-star books, 3 3-star books, and 1 2-star book, and oh boy is that going to be fun to talk about later. The genre breakdown was 3 contemporary novels, 1 adult romance, 4 graphic novels, 2 historical fiction, 5 fantasy books, 1 short story collection, and 1 mystery. I think that's everything, but it is entirely possible that I missed something, so we'll see. The first book that I finished, I listened to on audio, and that is The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. I gave this 4 stars. I really liked it. I was able to really relate to Ziamara in the fact that we were both brought up in religious households, and that we both kind of clash with our parents on occasion over how we interpret our religion. I am not someone who should be critiquing poems because I know very little about poetry, but I did really think that Elizabeth Acevedo did a really great job. There's one poem at the end that can be read in several different ways, and she tells you that on the audiobook and then reads it to you, the 2 different ways that it can be read, and I really enjoyed that. I think I would have gotten a little more out of it if I had listened to the audiobook while also reading the physical book, because for poetry, I at least need to be able to visually see like the stanzas and the breakups and all of that to be able to really grasp the full like impact of the poem, and so at some point I plan on rereading this and I'm going to do this that way. The next book that I finished was also an audiobook, and that was Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor. This is about Cassie Logan. She's a young black girl living in Mississippi in the 1930s, and this is just basically about her coming of age and discovering that simply because her skin is a different color than someone else's, she is seen as lesser than. I gave this one 4 stars as well. It was so good. It is a hard book to read, I will tell you that. It is a very hard book to read. Mildred Taylor does not shy away from what things were like for black people back then, and one of the hardest things was being able to draw parallels between what's happening back then and then seeing that there are so many ways in which we have actually not really made any progress. Like we think we have and we say we have, but we have not made any progress. She was so evocative. This was so atmospheric. I felt like I was sitting in those hot, muggy nights in Mississippi. I felt like I could feel the rain coming down on me, partly because I know muggy, swampy air because Florida. I really highly suggest that you pick this up. It's actually part of an entire series, so I'm going to go back and read the first few books, but I really suggest that you pick this up. We need to be teaching this in schools as much as we are teaching things like To Kill a Mockingbird. The next book I finished was one that I did read as a hard copy, and I was supposed to finish this in January, but I'm a little bit behind on my Shadowhunters reread, and that was Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare. This is chronologically the first novel in the Shadowhunters series. Written wise, like the way she wrote them, it is not, but like timeline wise, and I've been wanting to reread this as the timeline went on. I gave this 5 stars. I adored it. I loved it even more than I did the first time because I know where things are going, so I'm able to catch all of these wonderful like things that she's put in there, and being able to see just being able to see what her vision is with these characters and where they're going to be going in the greater Shadowhunter universe and how they affect things that happen 100 years later is just so entertaining, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm Shadowhunter's trash, and I can't deny that. This is about Tessa Gray. She ends up immigrating to London because she's going there to join her brother, but when she shows up, her brother is nowhere to be found, and she ends up getting kidnapped by this pair of warlock sisters. They tell her that she has the ability to shapeshift, and then they just basically like keep her locked up until she learns how to do this. She ends up being rescued by these Shadowhunters, and everything goes to hell in a handbasket from there. I absolutely adore this. I love how disastrous Shadowhunters are. They just cannot keep their crap together for the life of them, and I absolutely adore that. The next book that I read was one of my favorites of the month. This I also read as a hard copy. I actually got the library book, and I enjoyed it so much that by the time I was halfway through, I went and bought it myself, and that is The Proposal by Jasmine Guillory. In my defense, there was a sale. I gave this 5 stars. It was amazing. It was delightful. I had so much fun reading it. This book opens with Nick's boyfriend proposing to her on the Jumbotron at a Dodgers game. I'm not entirely sure what sports team it was. It's one of those California baseball teams. They've only been dating like 5 months. They've never even talked about like moving in together or any of those steps that most people usually take before marriage is on the table. And oh my gosh, if I was in Nick's position, I would have melted into the bleachers. It's one of my worst nightmares, being proposed to in public before we've had any discussion of the future. I'm just like, not that there's a we in this case. This was fantastic. I loved it even more than I loved The Wedding Day. Her dialogue is so snappy and witty. I love the friendship dynamics that she has in these stories. I love the way that she does the romance, because she does romance in such a wonderful, healthy way in which both people are usually talking. I mean, there's a little bit of miscommunication in her first book, but it's understandable because I would have done those same exact things. I highly recommend this. I literally got on my phone and texted all of my friends the day I finished this and told them they needed to read this. That's how much I loved it. The next 2 things that I want to talk about are not actually books, but instead they are manga. And I love this series so much. I'm rereading it. So I have Ouran High School Host Club Volume 1 and Volume 2. This is about Haruhi, who is a scholarship at the Ouran Institute. It's a very prestigious school. Most of the people that go there are hecka rich, but Haruhi is there as a scholarship student. She doesn't have a lot of money. And within her first couple of days there, she actually manages to damage the Ouran High School Host Club's very expensive vase. And they tell her that since she can't pay for this like $80,000 vase, that she can work her debt off. Because Haruhi is very androgynous just in her preferences, they thought she was a boy. So they turn her into one of the hosts at the host club, and her job is to help them entertain the young women who go to this academy and help them with these lavish parties. And then the big plot twist happens. And it is amazing. I love it. It is so funny, it is so witty, it examines and challenges gender dynamics. I gave both of these 5 stars, partly for nostalgia and partly because they're just the stuff I enjoyed about it the first time, I'm still enjoying it this time. I will warn you, there are some things that could be considered borderline transphobic and homophobic. They're played off as jokes, and since I am not trans or gay, I feel like I should not speak to whether or not they're actually those things. Just know that going in there. I don't think that was the author's intention when she wrote this series, because she is very supportive if you look and see through the different characters and the stuff that is discussed in this series. But just to warn you about that. The next thing I finished in February is Black Enough, which is a short story anthology edited by Ibi Zoboi. Several of the authors that are actually in here, I really enjoy their work, so I was definitely ready to pick it up. I also absolutely loved Pride, which Ibi Zoboi wrote, so of course I had to pick this up when I saw that it had her name on it. This was so good, guys. Like, there was not, I mean, I definitely had my favorites in here, but there was not a single story that I felt like, maybe one that I felt was a little too short, but all of them were just like so well fleshed out. The basic like thing binding these together is it's a bunch of short stories about Black teens living and thriving in the United States. It discusses social justice issues, but it's not like solely focused on the oppression of Black teens. Like, for example, The Hate You Give is. I just adored this. All of the stories were really strong, I felt. I don't think there was a single one that I like walked away from it going, why did I read that, or not enjoying it. I will say that my favorite one is, I believe, Nick Stone's story, Into the Starlight, because there are mentions of Percy Jackson, and like, I am down with anyone who likes Rick Riordan. Like, perfect guy right there. I gave this 5 stars. If you've been thinking about picking it up, I highly recommend it. The next one I finished was a physical book that I read. It's going to be interesting to talk about. That was Empress of All Seasons by Emiko Jean. I gave this 2 stars. I'm very sad I gave it 2 stars, but I did. If this still kind of sounds appealing to you, if you are someone who is more plot-driven, who doesn't necessarily need to connect with the characters to enjoy the plot of a novel and to be invested in it, I would say yes, definitely pick this up. I am character-driven though, and this entire book was really weird because it is not hard for me to connect with characters. It's just not hard for that to happen. And I did not feel connected to any of these characters. I felt like the pacing was weird. I felt like it's only 366 pages, and I felt like this needed another 100 pages because nothing felt like, she had great world building, she had such an interesting plot, but like nothing felt fully fleshed out. It's about a girl named Mari. She's been training her entire life because in her country they have this test for the next empress. So in this country, young girls are invited to the palace to enter in this competition when the heir to the throne comes of age, and their goal is to survive 4 different rooms, 1 for each season, and whoever survives that is going to be the next empress. But we didn't didn't really spend a lot of time, like there was so very little time spent in these rooms. Such an emphasis was made on that in the blurb, but there was not a lot of time spent in these rooms. It felt like they went by so fast. Everything in here just seemed to happen so fast, and then other things felt like they weren't happening fast enough, and then especially the ending needed more fleshing out, because there was a lot of summary in places that we needed scenes. So it just didn't work for me. I didn't connect with it. I hate that I didn't connect with it, because it had everything to be like a bang-up new fantasy, and it just did not live up to that hype. I actually ended up buddy reading this with Stephanie over at Shut Up and Read, and she has a lot of, we both basically feel the same way about this book, and it let us down, unfortunately. That it hasn't, I'm interested enough in her plot and her characters that I will probably check out other stuff that she writes, but this was not it. The next book that I finished in February was Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. I listened to this one on audiobook as well. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was really, really good and really interesting. It's about Ada, and it's a magical realism take on dissociative identity disorder. Ada was born with a god inside her, is how it's phrased. In order to cope with the fact that this supernatural being that is inside of her body can see way too much, she starts creating different parts of her personality to protect her from what's going on around her and how people are treating her. I think Akwaeke Emezi did a great job of communicating why Ada was doing the things that she was doing, why she was letting the different personalities, their identities that were within her take over, and what reasons. There were definitely, you were sitting there going, okay, yeah, I can see why she would need this other identity to help her cope with what's happened here or what's going on here. If you are looking for something that has an interesting take on mental health rep, I would definitely pick this up. It wasn't entirely my kind of book, just because I like something that's a little bit more focused on romance, because that's who I am. I didn't quite connect with it in the way that someone, I think, who has shared different experiences with Ada would have. The next book that I finished in February is The Sun Is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. I listened to this on audiobook. It is about Daniel and Natasha. It's a dual storyline with snippets from other people in there. Natasha's storyline is that she and her family are being deported to Jamaica at 10 o'clock in the evening that night, and she is trying to fight against it. She's trying to figure out how she can stay in high school, continue on with the college path that she's chosen, continue on with her life here in the United States. Daniel is a Korean boy, and he is dealing with the fact that his family wants him to become a doctor, and he is not necessarily set on that path. It doesn't appeal to him. Families like his, you really don't go against what your parents want for you. You do that. I think anyone who has listened to anything that any Asian American has said, that's a very common thread in a lot of Asian American families, is that you become a doctor, you become an accountant, you become something that's useful and is a field that you can make money in and support yourself in. They end up having this chance meeting. Daniel hears that Natasha doesn't believe in true love, and Daniel says that he can make her fall in love with him within 24 hours. And so this is about them spending one day in New York City and him trying to make her fall in love with him. I understand that some people don't like insta-love. I don't have a problem with it, but I have heard a lot of people who don't like insta-love say that this is still really, really good because of the way things play out and the way that they explore things. I love this. I love the way it came together. I love having both Natasha and Daniel's perspectives. I love the fact that we have all these outside perspectives, so we're seeing how other people's stories are influencing their story. It was just so well put together and well crafted. I loved it. It was very good. I highly recommend this. I gave it 5 stars. That was how good it was. It was just an automatic, I didn't even have to think about it. It was a 5-star book. So after I finished that book, because it was addictive as heck, I moved on to Tyler Johnson Was Here by J. Cole. This is about Marvin, and his brother Tyler was found dead. Video services that shows that he was actually killed by a police officer, and so it's about Marvin and his family as they're trying to navigate and deal with that. If you're thinking that this is The Hate U Give 2.0, it definitely is not. We are definitely more intimately connected with the characters most affected by Tyler's death. I was surprised by how long it took to get to the point where Tyler was dead. We actually get to know Tyler. We actually get to kind of see what he was like. And so it made it hurt almost a little, like in The Hate U Give, you're real sad for Star, and you're real sad for the fact that this situation happens so often. The only reason you care about Khalil is because you care about Star and how it affects her. In this case, we are so much more intimately connected with the character who ends up dying that it hits a lot heavier. It doesn't just hurt you because it is awful and something that shouldn't happen, but your emotions are also already truly attached to this character. And one of the hardest things is if you've read the blurb, you know what happens, and so you know what's going to happen, but Marvin and his mother do not, and so you're sitting there on the edge of your seat just going, oh my gosh, when are they going to find out? Is this going to be it? Is this going to be it? I definitely feel like The Hate U Give had its lighter moments. It was a lot more balanced with having some of Star's life, but this is also a shorter book, and it's also there. How are you supposed to have a normal life when your brother has just been shot? I ended up giving it 3 stars. The next book that I finished was, once again, a manga, and that was Ouran High School Host Club Volume 3. You don't want to hear me go on about Ouran High School Host Club again. I've already done that. If you do, just rewind the video. I gave this 5 stars because, again, it was fantastic. It was great. And this one actually ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger, so if you pick this series up, make sure you've got Volume 4. Like, it's a good kind of cliffhanger, but it's still a little bit of a cliffhanger. The next book is definitely my favorite book of the month, and also one of my favorite new fantasies, and that is the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. I tried to listen to this on an audiobook. There was just too much going on for me to understand what I was listening to. Like, I'm fine listening to fantasy most of the time on audiobook, but about the 4 billionth time that I had to rewind my book to figure out what had just been said, I was like, you know what, maybe I'll read the hard copy. And I did, and it was phenomenal, and I am so glad that I read this book. It is my favorite book of the month. I gave it 5 stars, obviously. This is about Essen. There is a whole lot going on here, but basically it is about a mother trying to find her daughter who has been kidnapped after this giant earthquake has happened by the child's father. Her father has also killed their son because he found out that their son is what is known as a roga in this world, and basically in this world the roga are used to still different earthquakes because the entire planet is basically just a massive earthquakes. There are shifting plates everywhere. There's so much upheaval going on. It is a dystopian. I've heard it called sci-fi. I don't think sci-fi really accurately describes it. I feel like this is more of a high fantasy, but it is so wonderfully accessible as a high fantasy. I'm going to go on about this for a minute, guys. I'm just bear with me because you're going to hear a lot about this book. This was so accessible as a high fantasy. Once I picked up the physical book, I didn't find myself having to go back and reread entire pages to kind of figure out how the magic system worked. There were a couple times that I had to backtrack because of where characters were, and I lost track of that, but she doesn't talk to you. You have to analyze every sentence to figure out what's going on. The magic system is easy to understand. You're going to be confused for the first few chapters. You are. Until you figure out how all of the threads are going to be mixed together, you're going to be confused. But it's like that with so many fantasies. So just go in knowing that you're going to be confused for the first quarter, and then you're going to kind of start understanding what's going on. Her world building in this is so tight. You can tell she really understands her magic system. I loved it. It's also told. It's one of the few books that I've read where there are parts told in second person, and it works so well. You wouldn't think it would, but it does. Parts of it are told in second person. That is from Essen's point of view. We also have 2 characters, Sierite and Demaya, who they're in third person, and so at the end you kind of see all of their stories come together, and the way that was done, I did figure it out ahead of time, but that's because that's what I like to do. I don't know if everyone would have, but I figured it out. But the way when it came together, the way I thought it was going to come together, I was just it was so well done. It was it was just so good. Read it. There is a trigger warning for child death and child abuse. So if that is something that you can't deal with, I would say steer away from this book, at least until you feel because it's talked about quite a bit, because Essen is actively trying not to think about it, and she's actively trying not to think about what has happened to her son. The next book that I finished was Lazaretto by Diane McKinney Whetstone. This I listened to as an audiobook, and I gave it 5 stars because it was this is another one where there are multiple storylines going on, and they just come together at the end in such a wonderful and gorgeous way. I can't really, there's no real way to explain the plot of this book and the different characters because there are so many different characters that you're following. They are all connected in some ways. There's not a single character that, it's oh, this random person and this random person and this. They are connected in some ways, and the way it comes together at the end, you're going to be just, bawling your eyes out. But it does follow several generations of Black people who are living in, I believe, it's somewhere in New England. I don't remember entirely where it was, but it's up north, and so they are dealing with the aftermath of the Civil. It starts out with them dealing with the aftermath of the Civil War, and it talks a lot about the different things that Black people had to do to survive back then, and the different abuses that even people who believed Black people should be free, the different abuses that were still heaped on them by those people who were preaching abolition. I highly, highly recommend this book. It was brilliant. It was amazing. It was just heart-wrenching and so good. Just so very good. It just was. and I don't really know how to articulate that without spoiling everything, because everything is so just interwoven. We forgot to talk about a book. I finished this after the proposal, but I'm going to talk about it now. I'm not even going to splice this back in the back. We're just going to deal with it being here. But I finished this after I read the proposal. It was my audiobook around that time, and that is Tiny Pretty Things by Danielle Clayton and Sona Kairopotra. Did I say that right? I think I got all of those letters in there. Sorry, I haven't looked up how to say her name because I'm a horrible booktuber. This is about Bet, June, and Gigi. They are 3 girls in a ballet academy, and it's about them trying to become the top ballerina in this ballet academy. It's a mystery. It's a dark, like, it's very dark. It's very psychological. I enjoyed it. I gave it 3 stars. I really did enjoy it. There was some stuff that just not my favorite thing. I will say there's a trigger warning for eating disorders because many of the ballerinas there have eating disorders, and definitely one of the main narrators does. You are always sitting there like kind of second guessing what's happening because we have several unreliable narrators here. And so Gigi, who is the new girl and is getting all of like the star parts, is kind of bearing the brunt of someone who doesn't think she should be. Like, there's someone who is kind of harassing her, doing little things, actually increasingly escalating things to keep her from taking all of the star roles. It was really good. It kept you guessing. It's got a really interesting romance. I'm not sure how I feel about it in some ways, and in some ways I'm cool with it. I don't know. We'll have to see how things play out in the second book, but I definitely am picking up the second book. It was, we didn't... part of the reason that this was a 3-star book and not a 4-star book is the central mystery, which is who actually is doing these things to Gigi. It's not ever actually resolved. So many things are introduced at the end that, like, you're gonna get them in the second book, but it just leaves you feeling so unsatisfied, and it did frustrate me, but it still was really good, and I'm definitely picking up the next book. And now we're actually down to the final 2, and so the next one that I read was a graphic novel, and that is Destroyer by Victor Lavelle. This is a modern take on Frankenstein. So this is a world where Victor Frankenstein is kind of revered. There are these alchemists that are trying to recreate his methods so that they can create another monster. And it's about a particular scientist who she has actually left this group and is trying to bring her son back to life. Her son was shot when he was 12 by a cop while he was walking home from a baseball game at night. It was such an interesting story. It dealt with so many heavy issues. It talked about the fact that we are continually like aging up Black children, that which is a consistent problem. Like, people will see a Black child and think they are much older than they actually are. We are unfortunately conditioned to see Black children as a threat much earlier than you would see anyone else. So it gets into police brutality, it gets into man versus nature, it gets into what we should do ethically with science. There are so many different things that are explored here. I gave this 4 stars. I did think that the storytelling, there were a few places where it could have been a little bit smoother, but I really did, like, I loved the story. I liked the art style. I liked where they took us. I liked the things that they explored through this, so definitely pick it up. And the final book that I read was The Bells by Danielle Clayton. I reread this in anticipation of reading The Everlasting Rose. I just kind of wanted to refresh my memory on what had happened in the last book, and I adored it as much the first time as I did the second time. Now this time I did listen to it on an audiobook, and I feel like I got so much more out of it that way. Just details stood out to me a little bit more on the audiobook than they had when I was reading it. I just was noticing things that I hadn't noticed. The Bells is about Camille Beauregard, and they live in this world where people are born gray, they're born ugly, and the Bells are there to come in and use magic to make them beautiful. They are the only people who are like normal skin colors and like look normal. And so Camille has been training all her life to be the favorite of the queen and be the one that does the beauty treatments for the royal family. Only once she gets the job, she realizes that there's a lot that she didn't know, even about her own powers. The book is about her figuring out all the political intrigue and discovering that there are things that people haven't told her about her powers and how Bells came to be. It was really good. I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. It was just as good the second time as it was the first time. That brings us to the end of our wrap-up for February. That was a lot of talking. Hopefully I can edit this down to something that resembles a reasonable length for a video. Let me know in the comments down below, what was your favorite book in February? Also, did you participate in any of the readathons that I participated in? Again, that was the BookTube Games, Blackathon, and vaLITines. Lots of reading got done because of BookTube Games. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up. Also, hit subscribe. I make bookish videos 2 to 3 times a week, and I would love to see your lovely face here on a regular basis. If you enjoyed this and you want more of me, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter. Those are both @thewordnerd with a 3 in nerd instead of the E. Thank you so much for watching. Happy reading, and I will see you later when we will talk about more wordy, nerdy things. Bye!